Slither's disgusting long one, alien parasite, explored. James Gunn's creature masterpiece. Narrated by Andrew Lapomardo. The film begins with a meteor that breaks upon entering the Earth's atmosphere and lands in the sleepy town of Wheelsy. Out of this rock comes a hostile parasitic alien that infects Michael Rooker's Grant. In his directorial debut, James Gunn probably forgot to mention a name for his monster, but fans prefer to call it the Long One because of its ability to assemble and merge with its victims. The Long One is a sapient and sentient creature that has existed in the universe since time itself, and its prime objective has been to consume entire planets by merging with the planet's biomass. It starts off as a hairy, needle-like organism that infects a primary host. The host impregnates a female, who serves as a womb for slug-like larvae. These slugs then enter other organisms through their mouths and take control of the brain. All the secondary hosts get consumed and assimilated into the primary host and begin to form one monstrous blob of immovable flesh with tentacles growing everywhere. James Gunn's mind is a scary place to be in because he makes sure that you don't resist the horror because of the connection he builds with you. The beauty of Slither lies in the gracious and effective use of special and visual effects in this horror comedy. The creature looks breathtakingly hideous, horrendous, and horrific, but at the same time, you would not want to move your eyes away from it. The Long One bears uncanny resemblance to terrestrial snails and slugs. In the original form, it shoots a needle into the host, much like the love dart that a few slugs and snails use to inject hormones and reproductive matter into females. Furthermore, like slugs, the Long One is a hermaphrodite, meaning it can reproduce asexually without a mate. However, it needs a female to serve as a womb or an incubator. It stabs two tentacles into the womb's abdomen. While one injects the ovum, the other injects the sperm. After the gestation period is over, the womb explodes and the cute little slug babies are born.
Let us hear.
Though garnering several accolades and critical appreciation, Slither didn't do well at the box office. Naturally, Marvelous Videos felt it was our duty to bring to light this masterpiece of film and give it its due respect and love. So, without further ado, let's explore how things slither. Before we get into the explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click from you, but means a lot to us. Thank you. Let's begin. The film opens with a meteor heading towards Earth at great speed, and we can hear the rumbling sound of a celestial object as it paces towards our home. Back on the planet, two cops, Police Chief Bill and Junior Officer Wally, are on night patrol. There, the meteor strikes the woods just behind them. Its outer surface made of a rocky material, while the inner portion of a soft, reddish, and fleshy one. One may consider it a cross between a coconut and a watermelon. Hey, don't judge us, we are just stating the facts here. Next, we are given a slight tour of the town, only with the intent of letting the viewers get accustomed to a few plot points and showing Gunn's respect for other horror films. One of the billboards tells us that a deer hunting festival is around the corner, and one of the hoardings has the words R.J. McCready, Auctioneers and Funeral Homes. If you may remember, Kurt Russell's character in John Carpenter's 1982 The Thing was named R.J. McCready. However, in this movie, there's not going to be any shape-shifting aliens. Well, at least not one that creates a sense of claustrophobia and paranoia. Moving on, we catch several of the townfolk, all of them different and unique in their own ways. Our favorite, however, remains the cigarette-smoking sassy priest. Interestingly, almost all of the random-looking people are going to feature later in the film, though maybe not in the way you'd expect them to. Next, we are taken to the biology class of Starla Grant, a school teacher with an old-time grace and nothing short of a Hitchcockian blonde. She's teaching the class about Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest and doesn't shy away from calling cockroaches fitter than humans. After the course, Starla is seen speaking to the environmental studies teacher, Hank. who is played by none other than Gunn himself. Starla and Hank get interrupted by her husband, Michael Rooker, as Grant. Yeah, the guy has the same first and last names. Next, we learn that Starla and Grant got married because he supported her when she was young and vulnerable.
Margaret, Starla's mother left her. Daddy's a drunk. She's 17 years old. Old Grant pulls up, big old Cadillac.
Her mother left when she was just 17, probably because of her drunkard father. When Grant came along and offered to help her with her education, she couldn't say no to him, and ultimately, the two of them got married. Having grown up in shanties, she was living her dream of being a respected lady. Bill's colleague, Margaret, is depicted as a lesbian. As Bill says, if Grant were a woman having a vagina, she would have married him too.
You'd have married him too.
What's a vagina?
It's a country, you know, where Chinese people come from.
Later that night, Grant attempts to make love with his beautiful Starla, but she rejects his advances, claiming that she isn't in the mood. Had we not witnessed the conversation between Bill and Margaret, we would have assumed that she was just genuinely not in the mood. However, that seems further from the truth. After this point, Grant gets agitated at the constant rejection of his moves and leaves the house to go to a local pub. There, he chances upon a lady named Brenda Montgomery, the sister of Grant's one-time ex, Megan Montgomery.
Megan Montgomery's little sister.
They get drunk and go to the nearby woods, where they end up kissing. However, Grant says that Starla would get anxious if he didn't reach home early. Naturally, this pisses off poor Brenda, who was hoping to get some action in the woods that were lovely, dark, and deep. Just before he leaves, Grant notices a gooey white shell of some creature and follows the trail with Brenda. They discover a pale, gelatinous sac that resembles the body of a squid. Remember the coconut watermelon blend we spoke about? That thing has transformed into this small creature now. However, the white sac was just a defense mechanism or an outer coating to protect the actual entity inside from Earth's alien atmosphere. As Grant approached and inspected the sac with a stick, the sac opened and shot a needle into Grant's abdomen. The needle was sentient and traveled immediately into his brain. The slightly hairy needle was actually the original form of an ancient alien, or the Long One. It has chosen Grant as its primary host and now shared Grant's movements, communication skills, language, and memory. After a while, Grant regains consciousness, but he was bleeding from his facial orifices. It seemed as if Grant didn't know where he was and begun analyzing his surroundings. Naturally, the alien needle had done the trick, and Grant wasn't Grant anymore, or at least he had started to lose control of his own mind and body. The following morning, Grant brings a huge pile of dried leaves to his basement and sort of bathes in it. It seems that the needle was making him resort to naturally wild instincts. He hears music playing in the living room and comes up to find Starla in her bathrobe and innerwear. Strangely, he doesn't seem to know who she is until he goes through the marriage photographs. It seems as if Grant has lost all his memory, but then it comes back even if there's a small trigger. When Starla says that she wanted to be a good wife and didn't want him to feel rejected, his eyes become watery. Probably because deep down, the real Grant was still there. But he knew that it was too late now, and that things would soon get out of hand, and he would lose his loving wife. Forever. Nevertheless, later that day, Starla tells a colleague how she had a great morning with Grant, and how he was discovering all her body parts like a little boy.
It was like he was discovering all these different parts of my body, like...
The poor girl doesn't know that these things were not anything romantic, but something entirely different and deadly. The needle of the Long One is manipulating Grant's mind, while his heart is trying to reach out to Starla. Later, Grant picks up a truck full of raw meat and locks it away in his basement. When Starla inquires about it, he tells her that he was planning a surprise for her birthday, but she has started to smell something fishy. The needle in Grant makes him feel lusty about Starla, and by now, tentacles have grown out of his chest. He approaches her in the shower to possibly force himself upon her sexually, but then something stops him from committing the assault. Despite being the primary host, Grant has some control over his decisions and actions. His love for Starla stops him from killing her at various intervals throughout the runtime of the film. At this moment, however, He makes an excuse that he had some urgent work at the office and leaves. He and Starla were supposed to go to the inauguration festival of the deer hunting festival, and he asked Starla to go there alone and promised to meet her there. He lands at Brenda's house. Meanwhile, at the Deer Cheer Carnival, Bill approaches Starla. They have a little friendly banter, share a few laughs, even share a moment. But Starla cuts him off and suggests going inside for the countdown. It is later revealed that Bill and Starla were friends as children and could have had a little something going on. As a 12-year-old girl, Starla once came up to his window and told him that she was going to Hollywood to become a star. She wanted the 14-year-old Bill to come along with her bodyguard for protection. But Bill said that all she needed for protection was herself. Funnily enough, she reached that bus station only to be brought back home because Bill had called her father about her little stunt.
This is Ranger Rick here called my dad.
Damn, a cop from the get-go, you son of a bitch!
And, to this day, Bill hasn't stopped feeling for that impulsive yet ambitious girl. As the mayor counts down to the beginning of the festival, Grant unbuttons himself to reveal his hideous chest to Brenda, much to her horror. All this while, Grant was searching for a female to impregnate, but since the impregnation would cost the female her life, he couldn't do it with Starla. Naturally, Brenda became the obvious victim. Grant injected his reproductive enzymes into her via 2 tentacles that emerged from his abdomen. As the tentacles breached her womb, her body started experiencing violent convulsions caused by the involuntary contraction of muscles. After impregnating her, he came back home and took out all the lights. When Starla came back from the party, she saw a hideous Grant with rashes and swelling all over his face. Grant had kept the pregnant Brenda locked in chains in what seemed like a dilapidated warehouse. She could still speak and think with sense and a bit of rationality, but was infected by an insatiable hunger for raw meat. Grant brought her so-called munchies, which she ate without wasting any moment. The more she eats, the better alien babies she would reproduce. Meanwhile, Bill and Wally came looking for Grant at his house because Brenda was missing, and the neighbors had seen him go to her house.
People saw Grant going into her house, and that's the last anyone seen of her.
Bill tells Starla that if she sees anything suspicious, she should call him. Sensing that something was up, she broke open the basement storeroom and found the carcasses of various missing pets from the locality and a hell of a lot of meat. She immediately called Bill and said,
You need to get back here right now. I think Grant is sick or something.
Starla had gotten Bill's machine, and Grant heard her monologue and assumed that she had cheated on him with Bill. He went after her to kill her for betraying him. But the good old Bill reached the spot in time to save the day. Well, night in this case. By now, Grant had converted further into the long one, and his arms elongated and stretched into long appendage. While Margaret tended to Starla, Bill and Wally went after Grant, but he escaped. Grant had been hunting farm animals for food. The following day, another attack was reported. And Bill saw a pattern in the attacks, and rightly concluded the next farm that Grant would go after. The officers, Mayor Jack McCready, Starla, and others formed a posse and waited for Grant to show up. When Grant finally showed up, he was hardly humanoid. He had tentacles growing from various parts of his body. Starla confronted him about Brenda, and the others cornered him. However, Grant bisected one of the members of the posse with a swing of his sharp tentacles, and swiftly crawled into the woods. They followed him and reached the abandoned warehouse where Grant had kept Brenda. They breached inside to find Brenda mutated into an inhuman figure. She was pregnant with thousands of slug-like larvae of the long one. Her body had morphed into a giant womb, in the middle of which was her little head. Strangely, even now, she could talk sensibly and inquired about the well-being of her child.
Bill.
It wasn't long before the slugs tore her giant stomach open and came out. They entered into the mouths of a few people present there, including Wally. To have a better understanding of the long one, his womb, and her slugs, let's ponder the analogy of bees. If we consider the long one as the bee that impregnated the womb, or mother bee, then slugs are worker bees, whose job is to gather more food for the newly formed wombs and to merge with the long one. This helps the long one to become bigger and more powerful. The slugs help the long one to infect additional organisms and bring them under its command. The only good aspect about the slugs is that they can only contaminate someone by entering their mouths, after which point they take over the brain. Upon realizing that Bill, Starla, and Margaret's mouths couldn't be entered, the slugs went on to the Strutenmeer house, where they infected the entire family and almost infected Kylie Strutenmeer. However, she managed to fight the slug and pull it out of her mouth before burning it with an ironing rod. Before doing that, the slug was inside her long enough to give her a glimpse of the Long One's past and how it ravages planet after planet by consuming all living beings. She learned exactly what was happening to Wheelsy and to Grant. Kylie managed to run away from her house, escaping the slugs, and got herself locked inside the family truck. But the slugs engulfed the car from all sides. Meanwhile, at the warehouse, Wally wakes up and starts speaking to Starla in Grant's diction. Soon, the others who had gotten poisoned with slugs start doing the same. This implies that the Long One and the convertees share a hive mind that enabled the Long One to control all the infected people and animals. Additionally, the slug host can spit an acidic substance that furiously affects the point of contact. As the Wally Grant starts to brag about how Starla always needed him to protect her, she shoots him in the head, and Wally's slug slithers out of his cranium and escapes. Back at Kylie's house, her family turns into zombies and seeks her out of the car. They use their old memories and language, implying that the slugs retain the host memories and other traits. However, Bill reaches the spot, and Kylie runs to him.
Parents, they're trying to trick you. The worms are in their brains.
As we mentioned earlier, all the town folks who were shown at the beginning of the film return as zombies. Bill somehow manages to fight them off and get into his police car with Kylie. As they drive, they witness Starla and Jack McCready being chased by a bunch of zombies. Bill smashes one of them with his car, only to see the love of his life shed off her easygoing nature and turn into a savage and brutal zombie killer. Bill had been trying to reach Shelby so that she could call in the cavalry, and it was only now that his line got connected. But in an unfortunate turn of events, Shelby herself gets attacked by the slugs, meaning that Bill and his friends were all by themselves. Kylie now reveals to the group whatever she learned when she almost assembled with the slug, and tells them that he came from the sky.
It's a goddamn Martian?
Martians is from Mars, Jack.
Or it's a general term meaning outer space fucker.
They return to the town, but get hit by a truck driven by one slug host. Interestingly, these sleepwalkers are definitely not like the zombies from typical Hollywood films. They retain a part of their consciousness, language, memories, and skills. They attack the vehicle to abduct Starla and Jack, while Bill and Kylie manage to flee. Bill and Kylie then decide to use a grenade to blow up the host, and by extension, the Long One. Bill goes to the station to retrieve the grenade, but gets attacked by a zombified deer. Kylie, however, comes to Bill's rescue and saves him.
Hey, motherfucker.
Elsewhere, at Grant's residence, the zombies, under Grant's command, give Starla a makeover and dress her up in the same white lingerie that she was wearing the morning they last made out. Starla wakes up from her slumber and approaches Grant, but she attempts to impale him with the sharp end of her hairbrush. This enrages Grant, who asks if she could kill an organism like him who has existed for 1 billion years. Bill arrives at the spot and answers, but his grand plan goes to shambles as Grant tosses the grenade with one simple stroke of his tentacles. Bill attempts to get the grenade and throw it back at Grant, but this time, Bill gets thrown out the window. The grenade is tossed into the pool to blow like a cracker. Grant has sent 2 of his tentacles to suck out the insides of Bill, who took one of them and inserts it into the opening of a gas cylinder. As Grant inadvertently sucks the gas into his body, Bill asks Starla to shoot him. After an emotional exchange, Starla realized that her husband was a savage beast from another world, and, even as a human, was no better than a jealous and overpossessive husband. She shot him, and Grant exploded into bits and pieces. With the explosion, all the other zombies fell flat on the ground. The film ended with Starla, Bill, and Kylie walking out into the dawn, with the dead lying around everywhere. The post-credits scene shows the needle hissing out of Grant's brain and attacking a poor cat. Do let us know how you feel about this deep dive in the comments. And if you wish for us to make other videos on films that you like, feel free to tell us. We are here to entertain.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.